Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Love, Rinse, Repeat, a podcast recorded on Darkinjung land by me, Liam Miller, he, him, his, a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia. We're back as promised with our second part of our New Year's Theolutions episode with a wonderful new panel, a panel that was going to get together last week, but didn't because we were going to be recording, mid-fascist coup in the US, and so we thought, we might all be a bit distracted by our Twitter feeds. So we're back now. But now we have this funny thing of we're doing New Year's resolutions after most New Year's resolutions have already been broken. We're in week 2 of the new year, which means I'd say conservatively 82% of resolutions folks have made are gone. So I think in some ways that takes the pressure off us, in the sense of this is just a much more looser idea of things that we're hoping to see and do and focus on both in our own work and, as we did last week, also expanding it out to talk about those things that we are hoping and hoping the church or the academy will resolve to do in this coming year. So that's enough of me. I'm going to pass over to our guest to begin to introduce themselves, so we get to know who we're learning from, who we're talking with today. So, well, we did a kind of a pre-introduction before, so maybe we'll stick with the order we went off the air. So, Keegan, do you want to jump in and let us know a bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. My name's Keegan Osinski. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am the librarian for Theology and Ethics at Vanderbilt University. So I work mostly with graduate students studying theology, religion, getting their MDiv, preparing to be ministers. So I enjoy being able to do a little bit of my own research and writing in theology, and then also being a part of other people's projects and getting to help them with what they're working on.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to talking more about your own research and a very particular project that you've got coming out soon. So we'll that's a tease for everyone that we'll get to that soon. Flora.
All right, my name is Flora. I take she, her pronouns. I am currently in South Bend, Indiana, getting my PhD in Theology and Peace Studies. I'm in my first year, so I'm still exploring what I'm doing, but a lot of what I want to study is, thinking about racialized trauma and intergenerational trauma as well as queer theology from a particularly sacramental theology lens. So I'm excited to see where that would lead. I am originally from Beijing, China, and I did my master's at Harvard Divinity School in theological studies.
Great, thank you. Nicole.
Hey, I'm Nicole Mugford. I am a member of the Uniting Church in Australia. I live in Melbourne, where I was working as a youth pastor, but I've just recently finished up that role. But I lead a community for LGBT young adults or people in their 20s and 30s. I'm not really sure what's young adults these days, but so that's been really cool. We lead that online across Australia. I am a youth worker by trade and have studied a bit of theology and ministry around the place as well.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I think young adult in the church world is a goalpost that keeps moving. As we're just trying to keep more and more folks in, it seems sometimes. But no, that's a wonderful. I'm excited to talk more about that community as we go forward. So, as we kind of started last in the part 1 of this is just a bit about we're starting a new year. Or we actually have started now, and I'm just interested in your own personal projects, personal aspirations, hopes, things you want to be writing, reading, forming, exploring coming into this year. That could be either in a kind of an academic lens or in terms of fostering a community, as Nicole has said. So I guess what are your own personal resolutions or theolutions, as we've been framing it in this? And anyone can jump in here to start with. That's fine.
I think the benefit of it being a couple of weeks into January is that if we didn't quite at the start of the year plan them, now we have the opportunity to plan them. And we look successful because we're already 2.5 weeks in. So, that's the benefit, I think. But for me, the community that I've been fostering online, we're looking this year to develop it as a faith community, recognised officially with the Uniting Church, which is a process that I'm not sure what that process is, but we've been having some conversations starting to look at what does it mean to be, I guess, accredited and formalised in that. And so with that, there's been a lot of conversation with myself and some of our leadership team around what does it look like what is a community, and what constitutes a faith community. So it's been a really interesting conversation to go, do we need the bells and smells to be a church community, or is it, a faith community, or can we, just because we pray, is that enough? And just because we gather together as people of faith, is that enough? And so it's been a really interesting, I guess, discovery and conversation as we're starting that. So that's been a really interesting thing that I'm hoping will just be discovered this year. And then I think personally, just discovering and discerning more of my ministry and what that looks like, and where that's formed. And so I think for me, I'm 28 and I'm just kind of at this place of life where I'm like, I just want to be me, and I want to be me proudly, and I want to live that out. And I don't really give a stuff if people don't like it. Like, it is what it is, take it or leave it. But it's taken a long time for me to get to that place, and so I feel like I'm there, and now I just want to live that out. And so with all the things that come with that in terms of trauma, baggage, doubts, questions, everything, like I just want to live that out. I don't know. That's me, I think.
That's beautiful. The great work begins. That's wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Anyone else want to share theirs?
I'll go ahead and share. I spent most of 2020 last year writing a book. So this year I'm kind of taking a break. Like, I know there's going to be work to do as far as edits. I don't have an exact date for when it comes out yet. It should be early summer. But writing a book is really hard. So I'm glad to kind of be done with the writing portion of it. I had to actually, today I was working on writing a short piece for a library journal. And I was like, oh, wow, I haven't written something in like a couple of months now, because I've just been like, I submitted my manuscript and I was like, okay, that's enough for a while. But so this year I'm definitely going to try to, take a little break from that, but also to get back into reading and writing in other areas, because I've just been, so the book is queer readings of John Wesley's sermons. So I just was reading John Wesley sermons and Wesleyan theology and, Methodist stuff, Nazarene stuff, and I'm kind of worn out on that for now. So yeah, my goals for this year to just kind of chill a little bit, kind of explore, what might be next, what projects I might start working on next. And then, just talk to people about my book once it comes out. I'm really excited about it. I think it's something that the Wesleyan churches will really benefit from, and churches more broadly, by having like a queer perspective on, one of these kind of great preachers that's really foundational to a lot of people's faith and practice. So I'm excited to see what kind of conversations come out of the book once it comes out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That sounds so exciting. Flora, how about you?
Well, Keegan, that book sounds really cool, and I would most definitely be interested in reading it once it comes out. See, I think like I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of what I study is sacramental theology, which is like a very specifically like a Catholic or Anglican Episcopal area that focus on the sacraments, and liturgy, which like I think like all of them is very queer, and that's kind of why I got into it. But yeah, so I think as I do more of that academically, I have been this past semester using sacramental theology as a lens to look at clerical sex abuse in the Catholic Church. And like, because we talk about healing a lot when it comes to survivors of any type of violence and trauma, but especially sex abuse. So thinking about like what healing means in the context of justice and in the context of like sacramental healing, and in the context of like, like patriarchies and systems of violence itself that needs to be healed. So I kind of hope to like keep doing that, but also extending that into looking at a theology of baptism, which is like the first sacrament a lot of Christians receive. And how to think of like a more decolonial theology of baptism, since like baptism itself has a lot of colonial baggage, and especially in like this American context, toward people who are Black and Brown, as well as Indigenous. So like, I don't really know where I'm going with that yet, but I know that's the topic that I want to explore.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, so there's some great stuff in all those responses that we can start to unfold and unpack. Keegan, I guess I'll start with you with the book. So I think one of the reasons I think it'd be really interesting for Nicole and myself and for others who'll be listening to this is, so we're both part of Uniting Church, which is a union of Methodists, Congregationalists, and Presbyterians. So that Wesley tradition is strong and prominent here in our church. So I guess what led you to Wesley to begin with, and then what was it when you started to read those sermons that you're like, hey, actually, I've got an idea, a very queer idea, and I think there's something here. And I guess, so what led you to that? And I guess then what leads you to think that the church can, as you said, the church can benefit, especially Methodist and Nazarene traditions. What is it that maybe more specifically you think that churches will benefit from this particular reading and this opening up of Wesley's work?
Yeah, so it's actually really funny. People ask me this all the time. One of my friends early on when I started the project was like, why are you so interested in Wesley? And I was like, oh, I'm not. But it just seemed like, so I'm a member of the Church of the Nazarene, which is an evangelical Wesleyan denomination. It's quite conservative. It's not affirming. But I'm queer, I'm bisexual, and I personally haven't had a ton of negative experiences with my own churches that I've attended in the Nazarene denomination. I've had a lot of support. I've had a lot of, friends that I've made. It's been a really good experience for me. And I know that is not the case for most queer people who've encountered this church. So just, this is kind of a digression, but to that point, I feel like because I don't have that kind of trauma that I've experienced, I have a kind of responsibility to be able to stay and just bear witness to another way of being, to just be able to be myself, Nicole, kind of what you were saying, and just like be like, I don't really care if you don't like it. This is just who I am. I'm here, I'm here. I'm here, I'm queer, I'm Nazarene. So that's kind of how I came to Wesley. So just as by the merit of being part of the Nazarene Church and having John Wesley be such, an important foundation. So, I studied philosophy and theology at a Nazarene college in undergrad. So, I was exposed to him there. And then I was also exposed to a lot of feminist Nazarene and Wesleyan scholars. Most notable, probably Mildred Bangs Wynkoop, who her big, major work is called A Theology of Love. It came out in 1972, I think. And her whole thing was that holiness, the basis of holiness, which is, the Wesleyan thing, is love, right? So the bare, just like the most basic way of describing holiness is perfect love. And so she led the crusade. Let's not use crusade language. Campaign. She led the campaign to kind of make this more of a central way of thinking about holiness.
Mm.
And so as I've been working with these texts for a while, I was like, you know what, like if we're to a point where we're considering, in queer theology, an ethic, a sexual ethic that is based in love, we might then also think about, if holiness is based in love, like there's something here, we can do something with this. So sorry, this is like a long answer. I will
go for it.
Wrap it up. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking Wesley's sermons as the kind of raw material and reading it with a queer lens and just kind of playing around with it and seeing what we can do with it. Because what I learned from a lot of these feminist scholars, which, the Church of the Nazarene has always ordained women, feminism, is, at least in word, if not in deed, like, an accepted, thing. And people use Wesley as a kind of proto-feminist figure, even though, of course, he was a man of his time. But feminists take his work and say, well, look, we can make it feminist, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, we can be a Wesleyan church that, has feminist ideals. Feminist theory and queer theory are real close, there's a lot of overlap there. And so I basically just did the same thing. I'm like, here's Wesley's sermons. Let's get some feminist theory. Let's get some queer theory in here. Let's roll it all around. And look, we can talk about a queer Wesleyanism, a way to talk about holiness as queer and queerness as holy. It's totally possible. And it's totally, we are able to continue a tradition that is faithful to the Wesleyan, way of thinking about faith. That's also completely legitimizes, I don't want to say legitimizes queerness, but views queerness as a legitimate holy way of being. So that's basically the argument that kind of goes through the book. I have an introduction that kind of lays out here's what I'm doing here, here's why I think it's possible, here's where it comes from. And then I have 10 sermons, and each of them kind of goes a different way, has a different little mini argument within itself. And then kind of the ultimate push or conclusion is you can have a queer Wesleyan theology that is liberatory for queer folks and really for everyone. So that's the project. That's what I'm up to. I'm excited about it. Like I said, I'm ready for other people to read it and have conversations and see what comes out of it. Because I think it's unique and original work, which this is the thing that always gets me, because it's I'm not a Wesley scholar. I'm not, I don't have a PhD. I'm is this not that hard? Why is nobody doing this? Although I do realize a lot of the reason why no one's doing this is because there are no affirming Wesleyan denominations. So anyone who is qualified or capable of doing this, a lot of them are ordained, a lot of them are working at Methodist or Wesleyan schools who maybe don't that kind of theology. So there's a certain risk for them. And I have the privilege of not bearing that risk of, I'm not ordained. I don't work at, a Methodist or Nazarene school or anything like that. So I kind of get to just say whatever I want.
Yeah. It can be very hard to find someone, amidst all the stacks of a library. You can really hide for days in there, I imagine.
Yeah, when the mob comes for me, I'll just hide out in the stacks.
I feel like that theology though is really well stacked Like it's really well situated in the, like the Wesleyan quadrilateral, like Uniting Church, like theological colleges, they just like love the Wesleyan quadrilateral. Like I swear every class I took, people were like, let's talk about the Wesleyan quadrilateral, but we're going to add this 5th section to it because we think this is, anyway. So it's like all the time, but like I just feel like the queer theology of that is really well situated within that quadrilateral, like within that experience and within that what that looks like. And so it's really interesting. I'm like super interested.
Yeah, I definitely make use of the quadrilateral quite a bit, and different other people's ways of using it. Yeah, that definitely shows up a lot because it like you said, it's like seems so obvious. Once I started like doing this work, I was like, yeah, why is this not already a thing? Like surely someone else has done this already.
Yeah, I think where I think also it can be so helpful is like often when we've been having debates in the Uniting Church around marriage and questions like that, there's often the invocation of, well, if Wesley were alive, and both sides will claim he would have been on this side or that side or whatever, which, whereas this kind of thing of like, okay, that question we can never answer and it's not actually that important, but what can be made of the work and what could be there latent in our traditions in the texts that we feel have formed us and in ongoing conversation with the lived experience, is maybe a more fruitful way to turn. I think that's what's something exciting.
Yeah, exactly. I talk about the idea of tradition as like a stream, right? Like it's moving forward. It's tradition isn't looking back at something static and like monolithic and being like, that's our tradition. Like we're in our tradition right now. And there have been, times where it has changed over time. And I think we're at a point where we're having that change right now. That doesn't mean we're jumping out of the river. We're just still going.
Yes, 100%. Flora, I was thinking about, with your work particularly on sacraments and sacramental theology, which, itself, I guess, and you're trying to bring it into a whole other kind of conversation as well around trauma and healing and post-colonialism and et cetera. Like this again is a kind of like reaching into the depths of this tradition and its richness and its potency, but trying to draw it into a new conversation. So I guess I'm just handing over to you if any thoughts you have, both either directly to what Keegan's been talking about or just into your own work now and how you think about this again, this wrestling with and looking for that liberative strain in past traditions.
Yeah, I really echo with what all of you said actually about tradition, because I think a lot of what Catholicism tends to debate is tradition itself. We really pride ourselves on the existence of a long tradition, and sometimes in different debates on pretty much every controversial topic within the church, there's been sides that say church teaching never changes. There's also been sides that say tradition is always moving. So I think that's always, and both sides reach into tradition as we look for evidence or arguments to support our claims, which I'm sure is the case in almost every denomination as well. But I think one thing that like really matters to me is that like at the heart of every Christian tradition, if I may say, is practice. It's not just teaching or writing or really dense theology that I can't even read because I don't speak German, but it's just what the people did. And I think for me, that's what Catholics call liturgy is, or some of us in Protestant denominations might call worship, or whatever we call it. It's just like the things that we do on the ground by ordinary people, most often women, actually, and the ways that we live out our faith, the ways that we pray, the ways that we engage with this faith in like a very like non-elitist and a very like not necessarily intellectual way. And I think for me that is the core of like what I think my tradition is, which is why I go back to liturgy and sacraments so often, is like what do people do and how do these actions convey meaning, and how do these actions liberate people rather than oppress, or in other words, how could they be more liberative rather than oppressive or colonial or like heteronormative. So I think like as we talk more about tradition, both in like my field and in general, yeah, I think for me, like, it's really helpful to keep in mind that, like, ultimately it's about, like, the people on the ground rather than just scholars or theologians or church leaders. So.
Yeah, that's something that I read when I was doing my research for my book. Is Dawn Moon has a book called God, Sex, and Politics, I think, and that's basically like what her argument is, that people have, churches have these like teachings, but when you get down to it, like it doesn't really matter what they are. What matters is like what the people in the communities are doing in real life. And I think that to that point is exactly why I'm able to remain in the Church of the Nazarene, even though a lot of like the higher level doctrines or rules are things that don't really work for me. My local congregation is where I find a lot of hope and life and grace and community. And so like, at the end of the day, that's what matters to me more, because those are like the actual human beings that I talk to on a regular basis, rather than this like nebulous like tradition that's not real.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've been in a similar vein. I've been reading some Marcella Arthurs Reed recently, and a very again, the very like
we're all dancing.
Yeah, no, I got a big pop. I love it. But again, that very much of the like, what is the actual lived experience of people, and what is actually going on there, and how often that's ignored or papered over, I think is really vital. Nicole, I'm curious. You're thinking here, because in some ways you've started very organically this, community, this faith community, right? This, like, as you say, you put it out there, maybe 5 of my friends will come on, and then it's grown and expanded, and people are finding it a home. And so that's, it started with just people's experience, their hopes, their very, a very informal kind of gathering, but now is wrestling with okay, so to take this further, there now needs to be a sense of it coming into a broader tradition and a broader history and movement. I wonder if you have any thoughts on almost this, that you kind of living in this tension right now, and I guess maybe either the fears of what it might lose, weighed up against what it can gain, and how you're thinking of navigating it, or whether you're just thinking like, look, sometimes utilitarian steps must be made, and then we'll just go on doing what we're doing.
Yeah, so like a lot of the reason for formalizing it is money. Unfortunately, we're not really sure. At the moment, it operates out of my study. It's an online community, so the cost to me is a Zoom membership every year. It's not overly big, but we're kind of just looking at, well, what does that look like in the future for this community, realizing that there are 30 or 40 people that are actually connecting in with our private Facebook group and our conversations. And so part of it is, well, what does that look like to have some accountability? And if we were to meet up with the people that live in the same state as me that gather, what does that look like to do that? Do we have insurance to do that? Do we need insurance? Do we care? Who's accountable for this? Am I going to get sued if the church realizes that I'm talking about sex and gayness? And, like, what does that look like? And so just having some of those protections makes formalizing that process kind of a necessity, more so than anything else. And then hopefully as well, with that in connecting to money, then maybe I could get paid for some of the stuff that I'm doing in the long run.
Yeah, love it.
But the dream.
It's the dream, yeah.
So actually getting paid for your labor.
It's a novel thought, but got bills. So I don't know. I think that's part of it. But I think there is a risk of losing the authentic kind of home nature of that gathering by formalizing as something. And also we've been really intentional as we've set this up. Like a lot of people, I've put it out on Facebook, and I have a reasonably big social network connection, and a whole bunch of ministers have been like, oh, can we come along? It sounds really interesting, a discussion topic. And I've just said no a lot of times. And I've said no because gays aren't guinea pigs. And that's kind of become my catchphrase because, and the ministers and the leaders that have asked, they're really well-meaning. You know, they want to learn what does it mean to pastorally care or to connect and everything. But like, that's not what that space is for. That space is for queer people to find home, to find community without judgment. And so they don't need a whole bunch of onlookers trying to work out how to talk to them in that space.
Yeah.
And so it's been a really hard tension to do that, because then there is that kind of exclusive, you know, you've got to be gay to be in this community. You've got to, you know, have questions of your sexuality or gender identity. And so like it's an interesting space to try and work out, like I don't want to be excluding. So what does it look like to have a community that's open but also that's really safe? So there's all these kind of tensions to balance up in that regard, as well as, you know, what does, if I was to join a denomination or a, you know, what would our denomination require of us, and what does the Australian law require of church communities or whatever, you know. And so yeah, I have no idea, honestly. I honestly, like, I sat down, I was questioning my sexuality a number of years ago, and I'd just kind of come out like literally 3 days before I went to the National Young Adults Leaders Convention, which is a Uniting Church conference. We had it 2 years ago, and I was sitting down with some of my friends who were queer, and we were just chatting about stuff, and it was kind of probably the most freeing experience of my life, just kind of being able to share my faith, my theology, my identity in that moment, and just not worry. It was the first time I'd been able to do that, but from there I kind of was like, I wonder what that looks like to be able to have those conversations and to have those spaces. And, you know, when I was not out, I was deeply seeking those spaces, but I didn't have them. And so I think that's where it grew. But I honestly, as I said, I only thought 5 of my friends would rock up, the 5 that, you know, we talked about late into the night at this conference. And, you know, the first event that I hosted online was in the prime of like Australia's COVID lockdown, so that probably helped because people were bored. But like, you know, 30 people rocked up, and then I was like, oh crap, I'm a leader, how do I do this? Like, I did not expect this to be a thing. And so every month we host a different conversation. But I think with that, I don't know how it came back, but I was thinking just before, one of the things that I think the church needs to give up but also take on simultaneously, I don't know if that's possible, is sex. Not like just conversations of it. Like, I'm so sick of the judgment around sex and everything, but also there's no good conversations about sex. So like the conversations I'm having in our community at the moment, like we every month have a different discussion topic around stuff, but like we're just, as people in our 20s and 30s, could just be the part of the life, like my stage of life, it probably is, but we just like, we need a good sexual ethic, and I don't think that's being encouraged. And like, or at least the sexual ethic that's being taught is still the sexual ethics from the 70s, but it doesn't actually relate to what society is looking like. And so, you know, purity culture is rubbish, and abstinence is not necessarily a active part of life. And so how do we actually teach into that and live into that? And so like the church needs to start having those conversations and considering those conversations, and what do relationships look like if they're not just, you know, if they're ethical non-monogamous, you know, what does it look like for, you know, our asexual community or platonic relationships, you know, like there's just, it's so much bigger than just someone and someone having a little cuddle. Like, I don't know what rating we have here. I'm just saying.
I know, go for it. Yeah.
You know, and so I just like, yeah, I don't know. We just need to have a better conversation, because the conversation is happening, or it's not happening, in the privacy of people's homes and in the privacy of friendships and relationships and everything. And it would be really nice to be able to have that theological conversation around that. And
Yeah,
it's awkward at time, but it's good.
I found, you know, because again, like my work right now is a lot about sex as well. And people really do, like, there isn't a good place to have these conversations. Similar, Nicole, to your, you know, you didn't think very many people were going to show up, and then it was like this whole thing. I guess 2 summers ago, maybe 3 now. Time is fake. I don't know. But I I was teaching a queer Bible reading workshop. And I was just like, you know, I told my friends, like, I made a Facebook event, like, I'm going to do this thing where it's like, here's how you read the Bible queerly. And yeah, I think like 30 or 40 people showed up, and a lot of them were young people, college students at the Nazarene college, who were like, this is so great. It's so interesting. No one's talking about this here, you know. I visited another school and gave a talk on my queer Wesley stuff, and afterwards I was just like mobbed by these college students who were just like, what? This is so cool. Like, we want to talk more about this. And I'm just like, you know, the church is so, like, supposedly wants young people to get involved, and like young people have, you know, thoughts and ideas and want to have these conversations. Like, I see there's a real easy solution here. But yeah, people are really hesitant and scared of what that would mean to like actually have these honest, authentic conversations.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, just really quick. I think along those lines, like something that I've been thinking about is, yeah, like not only talking about sex, but also like rethinking what sexual ethics could look like in our day and age. And in the same way that like a lot of our social ethics from more of the progressive Christian traditions have like, I guess, centered the voice of those on the margins, so those who are poor, those who are economically disadvantaged, for example. Like, what does it mean to rethink sexual ethics that like center the experiences of those who are like on the sexual margins of different churches, so, like those who are queer, or like or those who have been sexually violated and abused, and or just different categories of people whose experiences we don't tend to focus in, like the quote-unquote normative sex ed between like a cis man and a cis woman. And like, what does it mean to like begin from those experiences that are more on the margins and center their actual experiences, not just like theories on sex. But then like have that start the conversation rather than be like, oh, by the way, like gay people exist, you know. So
especially in the church where everything is so centered on like the nuclear family. You know, even like straight cisgendered single people are often left out because it's all about get married, have kids, like that's the only option. And increasingly, like, as you know, some denominations are becoming more open to like gay folks, they're like, yeah, gay folks are great if you also get married and have children. You know, there's not actually room to have these conversations or to explore what queerness actually is. It's still very dominated by the heteronormative situation.
And you're still considered a young adult until you're married with children. Like, that's the definition of young adult. Like, I was young adult pastor in my church, and someone was like, oh, you need to go and you need to make sure you include, you know, so and so over there. And I'm like, he's 42 years old. Like, really? They're like, oh yeah, but he's single. I'm like, so like, I was like, I don't understand what to do right now. He's old enough to be my parent. Like,
no, yeah, I'm finding that too. Like when I was talking about meeting with these like college students, I'm starting to realize I turned 32 next week or the week after, and I'm like, oh, I'm aging out. Like I need to start like actually like being a role model or like like talking to adults.
There's nothing more humbling than having like a 15-year-old be like, you're like literally double my age. And I was like, thanks dude, thanks.
Yeah.
But I think one place that I'm hearing this like theology that's helpful is, as stupid as it is, like progressive Christian TikTok. Like it is, like I love it. Like and like it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, you're scrolling your For You page and it's like rubbish upon rubbish and dances and people having rants, and then you just like hear this gem from like this minister somewhere, and they're just like 60 seconds of like, you are loved, you're welcome, you're okay, go do what you want. Like it's just great. Like I think it's I don't know, I'm loving it.
I think what's so important is like if like we abdicate that sex talk, and sometimes it's abdicated out of our like, oh look, we don't want to be prescriptive on people, or you know, we don't want to be harsh on people's buzz, or sometimes it's out of a kind of a, oh, it's a bit taboo. We're leaving it open to those who will talk about it, which inevitably are people who are going to be pushing a very restrictive, repressive kind of situation, you know, who have no qualms talking about what is okay in terms of the sex. And so if people go looking for Christian talk sex, that's what they'll find in spades. And so if we abdicate that, then you know, we just are not providing people what they need, because we do want to talk about, as you say, flourishing and exploring and experimenting and breaking apart binaries. But we also want to be able to have a conversation. We say that some things are harmful. That a sexual ethic includes a level of robustness to be able to talk about that which damages, that which abuses, that which denigrates, but not in a way that that buys into an old kind of patriarchal heteronormative model, but one that is fruitful. But the thing is, we're not able to develop that because we're not able to talk about it at all, and so it leaves it to those again who are more than happy to discuss it. So shifting gears a little bit, we've you know, we're thinking about, we've already started talking about one of the big things that we want the church to kind of pick up. I've been thinking also about, like, you know, obviously church has existed online predominantly this last year, and it's been very, very different in that sense. And in some ways, Nicole, it allowed you to start a community, right? Because what are we going to do but get on Facebook on a Wednesday night, you know? But, you know, eventually, hopefully, things might open up again. I mean, they have a bit more here. We're back to meeting in person where I am. But I guess in some sense, I'm thinking, what have we hoped maybe that has been learnt or experienced in this time that will be carried forward into the future? And Flora, I was thinking particularly when I was, you know, thinking about inviting you, you know, your experience of liturgy and sacraments, and you know, because that's been something that has, you know, radically been changed and been a flashpoint in a lot of the conversations is how do we do liturgy online, and particularly how do we think about sacraments. So I guess, you know, as we think about what your experiences online, either with the church or without, this year, and what are some of maybe the lessons learned, or the experiences that we've been kind of forced to wrestle with, that we're hoping carry on and inform what comes next.
I can start just to kick it off. Yeah, back in March, like when the lockdown first began, like a group of friends and I was still in Boston then, like decided that we would start a little Zoom church. And that has been running since then, and every Sunday. And then during holy seasons, like Easter and Christmas, sometimes also on those days as well. It was pretty organic. Like I did not expect to start anything like that. It pretty much follows like the Catholic liturgy of the word model. So everything leading up to like the celebration of communion itself. And then, yeah, it's a group of friends who are all queer. But like everyone else is also welcome. Like it's not like a queer exclusive church group. And like we've been taking turns each week to preach and preside, and then opening up the sermon or homily space for everyone else on the Zoom call to also share if they wish. Yeah, and like we've been doing music, and yeah, like little blessing prayers. We figure out ways to like say blessings over holy water. Yeah, to like at least bless our own water, to whatever extent that means, to use during like the Easter liturgies, So I think that's something that just like, yeah, really magically happened for me throughout the pandemic. And yeah, like I feel like ever since I left college, I never really felt at home in any particular like Catholic parish. A lot of them are really cool. I just like, some of them are just really big, and I haven't like really connected with people there. And other churches have great music, but the homilies might be like homophobic, and I would be kind of like sitting at the edge of my seat and be like, please don't say that, please don't say that. And I think like this has been, so like my little Zoom church has been such like a little space of grace for me, where I've seen like my friends who, some of them are MDivs or theology students, others are not, taking turns to preach in really beautiful ways. So I feel like looking back, like I was just like, yeah, this should have been like, almost should have been there the entire time, where like little communities of predominantly queer people and otherwise progressive people get together to like share the wisdoms of their own faith, and to make liturgies really creative and really beautiful, which is like what like us queer people are really good at doing in like traditional churches anyway. So yeah, like I really hope that whether it's for me or for other people who have found really creative communities, that those communities would continue, because it's almost like for the first time I'm in this like authentically Catholic space, that I also know that like I can be fully myself, and I don't have to like cringe or like cross my fingers every time like the word family is brought up during a church homily, or like something icky like on like divorce and marriage is brought up. So I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, thank you.
I love that. That's great. My church, my local church also is pretty small. So when we had to go online, it's actually pretty funny. I was the only one that had or knew how to use Zoom because I worked at the university. And so I was like, oh, here's the link to my Zoom room. Like, we'll just meet there. And like 10 months later, I'm still the one hosting church every week. But especially at the beginning of the like initial lockdown, my church folks were the people that I really saw the most, because I didn't really see my friends. I wasn't going to work every day. But we met on every Sunday, and then for a while I was going to our Wednesday night Zoom meeting as well. And it was just like a small place to like process what the hell was going on. And so I think to the point that we talked about earlier about the reality of, our liturgies and the work that we do in the church, for my church, it really, we put together it mirrors our normal liturgy pretty closely, but, we just get on Zoom, we do our normal thing, we pray together, there's a sermon, we hear from our pastor, we talk, share our lives. And we just kind of do the bare minimum of what we need to do to get worship done. We're not trying to do anything fancy. We're not like pre-recording or editing, which I know some churches are doing that, and that's been great for them too. But for our, there's like 20, 40 of us or something. It was just like, let's just meet together. Like, that's all we really want to do. So let's just like make it easy and do that. So I think the lesson there has been, just like dealing with the reality of people's lives and meeting people where they are, and kind of, I think for me, this is one of the like overarching lessons of the entire pandemic is like, sometimes the bare minimum is okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tend to be a little bit of an overachiever, and I've been like, okay, girl, you need to stop. Like, this is not tenable, this is not sustainable. And I think that's something that for sure I experience within my church community as well. Like, let's just do the bare minimum, and that actually is really fruitful and healing and a really beautiful space for us in this time.
Yeah. I think I hated everything about online church. I say as I lead an online church space. I think like in terms of my normal congregation, we did a pre-recorded service. So I think we were online from about Lent 2 to Advent 2, so it was about 38 weeks online. So we did 38 pre-recorded services. As a pastor, I was part of those 38 services. But I just hated it because it was pre-recorded. There was no community. There was no gathering space in that. And as someone who lives alone, therefore I was kind of alone in my gathering of worship. So it didn't really feel to me like a communal worship opportunity. And so I kind of really hated it. The Uniting Church, they gave permission for online communion services to be conducted, and I hated that. It was a part of the decision that was made for that, and I support the decision, that's fine. But just for me, as someone who lived alone, like I wasn't breaking bread with community. I wasn't in communion to have communion, and so I just didn't like it. And I think as both of you have said, like people were really okay with just gathering together and being creative and trying new things. And I think for me, the disappointment was when we went back face to face. We went back to the same stuffy old building and did the same things that we'd done, even if they hadn't worked, prior to that. And even if they hadn't worked online, we were kind of straight back to it. And I just, I wrote a blog, and it came out of my bitterness, but I wrote a blog about and I titled it "The Church is Redundant." And the premise of my blog was, it was out of my frustration of being made redundant at the church. But I was just we'd spent 8.5 months saying the church isn't a building, and then we went back to the building and we were like, we're back, church is back. And I'm like, but I thought the church wasn't a building. And it's just I don't know, we have these buildings. And so for me, I spent a lot of lockdown going, well, I actually really like sleeping in on a Sunday morning. I really like being able to go to my local coffee shop and go to the beach and, connect in community in those places. So what does it mean that we lock ourselves away in a building for an hour and a half on a Sunday and actually aren't engaging with the wider church? And these buildings, they were shut up for 9 months, particularly where I live, we had a really harsh lockdown conditions, and we weren't allowed further than 5 kilometers from our house. And so it was really kind of, I was further away from my church. I couldn't even get there, it was too far away. And so what does that mean to do community in the local park, or to do it, and so I think there's so much, again, it comes back to money, but there's so much money in assets that we have that we're just not using properly. And what would that look like if we use them in different ways to fund different communities? And so I think for me, I really ended up questioning a lot of that. And I came back to church face to face to be made redundant and to leave 2 weeks later. So I kind of, I don't have a church community right now. I'm kind of in between spaces, and I deeply love the church. Don't get me wrong, I deeply love the church. I would consider myself a Uniting Church nerd. I'm involved in many councils of the church and everything, but I just think we need to be ready and willing to consider what does it look like to do ministry differently, to do it outside the church, building space. I don't know, I just there's so much trauma held up with the church as a building and with the institution, and I wonder what does it look like to be free of that. I don't have any answers though.
No, they're great questions though, and no one should doubt that your love for the church. It's only out of love that people ask these kind of questions and make these kind of demands. And I think it's really valid. One thing I was thinking about with kind of the 3 responses was the way that it seemed, maybe a little less so with what you're saying with the pre-recorded, Nicole, but that space was being made in the way that the church was being done. People were gathering, space for people to reflect, to talk, to process. And to some extent, as you said, Nicole, when you can kind of just get together in a park or at the beach with a few people. And I was thinking about then, this year has not only been COVID, right? This year has been, increased attention to racialized violence, in the US, rising ethno-nationalist fascism, to in Australia continued denial of Indigenous sovereignty and the truth of our history. Continued this, right? Like every day there's a story, every other hour there's a new thing of like a new erosion of democratic norms that we thought could survive a lot more than they seemingly can. And sometimes you see, then you go like, well, like preacher better make sure they're addressing this in a really succinct, thoughtful, passionate, well-constructed way that still, relates to whatever text that we got to do, and it puts that all on this one person to try to like scramble a message together. But if we're thinking about these kind of ways that we've learned of opening up, then we kind of develop maybe more ways to actually constructively, healthily process that, rather than have one person try to do it for us so that we feel like it was addressed, and thus we don't actually have to process it ourselves because that person processed it. And also, just as a minister, takes a little pressure off, like being like, I have to try to speak succinctly and coherently and goodly about this whole thing. And so, yeah, just thoughts on that, and potentially the way that might help our churches actually try to combat some of this, the racism and patriarchy and nationalism in our midst, or not necessarily in the midst in terms of the local manifestation, but in the church.
I think one interesting thing about church being online, so I think my personal congregation, we lost a couple of people who just like haven't really shown up, but we've also like gained people who moved away and maybe didn't find a church there, or just people we hadn't seen in a long time. They're like, oh, I can log on to this, so it kind of, or I know on Christmas Eve, my church didn't have anything going on. And so I just kind of put out on Twitter, like, hey, send me the links to your church tonight. And I just got tons of responses. And I was able to visit like so many churches and I never would have really thought of doing that or been able to do that in person, obviously. So I think like having online church or online versions of church or meetings is really this way of opening it up to people that would never be able to or would never necessarily want to show up to your church building, right? You can bring people in, like guest preachers that like my church hasn't done this, but like we wouldn't be able to afford to like fly somebody in, or whatever, but we could probably like give them a little something to show up on Zoom, what I mean? So like I think things like that, of just like opening up these topics of conversation with more and different kinds of people than you would normally like interact with on a regular Sunday in person. I think there's a lot of really interesting possibilities there. And I know for me, like my own education and like radicalization, for lack of a better word, really has been due to like meeting a ton of different people. And the internet is a huge part of that too, like just being able to meet people all over the world. I mean, hi, I'm talking to people in Australia right now. Like, and I just would not be able to do that without the internet and without this kind of open opportunity to like get different perspectives and to really hear from other people's life experience. And I think that there's something really important there that we should tap into.
And I think like I mean, you might have, but I never heard anybody during lockdown going, I just can't wait to get back to those wooden pews to sit there and, watch an old white dude in a robe carrying a candle. Like, I just, like, people didn't say that. That's not the things that they cared about in that. And I think, but one of the good things about being online is that you've got that comfort of home. You've got that space to tap out if there's something that's triggering or not safe in a community, but you've also got that you've got the ability to fast forward and mute when people are talking stuff you don't agree with. And I think as much as we hope that people don't ever do that to us as preachers and leaders, it's also I think there's that space then to actually be able to create that opportunity for conversation and to kind of pick and choose your content a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful, especially as people want to. I think I was talking to someone the other day, a minister of a reasonably progressive church around our place, and he said he's found a lot of people have come to him because they used COVID as a chance to leave their church because they weren't going every week. They'd already kind of maybe deconstructed in that place, but it was a bit hard to leave because of all the relationships. But like in some sense, they were able to shift with it being a bit less pressure on them in that time.
And you can church shop while online because, as you said, you can go to, 20 or 30 different places and have a look around and see what you find in that space.
Yeah, every Sunday morning, I think I must have said something truly witty and insightful on Facebook because of all the notifications I'm getting. And then I just realized it's all these churches going live.
It's so annoying.
Nothing to do with me at all. It's just tragic. But yeah, one thing I was thinking about, Minister near me, she's been doing, so with COVID, they weren't doing a Sunday online space. She was doing basically daily devotions. So she would write out 5, I think it was for weekdays, daily devotions with a prayer, and that would get mailed or emailed to everyone in her church. And people were really loving it, right? As this way to kind of ground the day. And kind of what we were talking about is, she's like, I won't be able to continue that when we return because I'll need that space to prepare the Sunday service. And kind of one thing you were saying is like, is there a way that if that's what people really appreciate, could you do that and then radically rethink what happens on Sunday? Is the thing that people have missed most singing and having coffee with each other, which it seems to be, because a lot of people, we're allowed to return, without morning tea and no singing. And a lot of people are like, we'll come back once we can do those things, right? Which is fair, right? So could you basically build a Sunday around, okay, more music, some communal prayer or sacrament stuff, and then just a longer time together, hanging out and talking and find ways to do that, and then still do this daily devotion thing where people are still getting their discipleship and their Christian formation and things like that. Is that a way that we could have learned something from this, that if the community appreciates this? But as somewhat to Nicole's point, it takes the resolve to go and the grit to kind of keep it when you have the choice again. And as you said, it's so easy to quickly fall back into this what was before.
And I think, that's where the creativity as well is like stifled. Like there was so much creativity, particularly at the start of kind of a lockdown. I think we kind of got a little bit over it by the end, but people thought really creatively. My minister took photos from around our local community, aware that not everybody in our community could get out. So they, might have actually been missing the beach or been missing a bit of the area. And so he took a photo a day and did a prayer and a reflection. And it kind of, from there grew this, it was a huge following on our church social media of people wanting to follow the day in the life of a virus posts. And like in the end, it's been published as a coffee table book, with a reflection devotion. But it was a beautiful creative reflection. And church got in the way of that a lot of the time. Preparing for Sunday worship got in the way of these reflections. And so they started off, right at the start of the lockdown, being every day you get a new post, to being like, oh, we'll do it every second day, to here's one a fortnight, like by the end of it, And so I think there's I think 70 or 80 photos from the lockdown, but it started off being every day, and it was hard to maintain, but it was like really, really well received by the congregation. People wanted to be able to share that story of faith and reflection from their local community, photos from our local community with their neighbours. So people ended up buying the book, in bulk for, well, I want to give it to my neighbour who I've been giving food to, and I want to give it to this person. And, it grew. But I think, we don't have enough space for our minister to continue doing stuff like that.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I think, I love like the local, like neighbor to neighbor nature of like what you said, Nicole. And I think like for me, like one thing I've been thinking about along those lines is like thinking about like the church in relations to power, and in relations to like what does it mean to like decenter the church in our Christian life. Not in the sense that like we all like don't go to church anymore and like never go inside the building again, but like what does it mean for like the church itself, especially those of us who are like, I don't know, I call it professional Christians, or however you want to call it, we're in ministry, to be willing to like decenter ourselves, and decenter like our roles as ministers, as church leaders, or whatever y'all are. And I think, yeah, in the same way that like this past year, like we've been having a lot of conversations on whiteness and race, where one of my friends in my theology program recently said that like something along the lines of like whiteness must be crucified. And it must be willing to be crucified in order for racial justice conversations to move forward. Yeah, which is different from saying like, yeah, whiteness, like white people should you know keep doing their thing. I think like whiteness itself as like this as a sin and as a theological construct must be willing to be crucified. And in a similar way, like what does it mean to talk about like our churches and the physical buildings and our ministers and their the need of like for all of us to like give up our own power and our own voice and be like, oh, what can like these people do? Like what does small c church look like on a more local level, on a more lay-led level, as we have seen in your example, Nicole, and in all of our experiences in the pandemic.
Thank you for that. We'll probably start, landing the plane in a moment. It's been a wonderful conversation. It could just keep going. But I asked this one at the end of the first part, so I'll ask it again. What is there any particular book or conference or something coming up in 2021 that you're particularly excited for? Now, we all know the main answer is Queering Wesley. That's predominantly, I guess. So we've all said that. So now we're just talking about 1A. It doesn't have to necessarily be something that's coming out this year. It could be just the thing that has been sitting on your desk or nightstand for the back end of 2020 that you're like, I'm really truly going to read this in 2021. Or it could be, as I said, conference. It could be whatever it might be. Is there anything that you have that you're just very excited and you want other people to potentially be excited about checking out?
I'll start. There's I'll give you 3 things, but they're probably more personal things. So if everyone checked them out, that would be crazy. But the first one is a Uniting Church specific conversation. I'm really interested in the Assembly of the Uniting Church in Australia is starting a conversation called the Act 2 Project. And so the Assembly Standing Committee, of which I'm a part of, the Governance Committee, we've been looking at what does the future of the church look like and what is that, how do we engage in that? And so I'm really interested in that conversation. And so the President of the Uniting Church and the President-elect and the General Secretary are hosting a series of Zoom conversations with people, and there's surveys and there's work that's being done in the lead up to our next National Assembly meeting, and I'm just really excited about what voices and opinions we might hear that we haven't already, and what that might look like for the future of our church as we kind of enter into the second act, which is kind of where it comes from, that idea. But so I'm really excited about that. I'm also really excited about as part of the queer community that I've got online, we're starting some book clubs this year. And so the first book that we're reading starting in a few weeks is Shameless by Nadia Bolsweber. And I'm just really excited. Like, I've read the book before, but I'm really excited to have a conversation with that and to be able to unpack that with a group of people. So there's 14 people signed up for the book group, and just a diverse group of people, married, queer, children, all of that kind of thing. And so I think I'm really excited about that. And I'm looking at the second book that we're going to do for a book group sort of thing later in the year. And I haven't read the book yet, but I'm really excited to look into it. It's called Rescuing Jesus, by, I think, Deborah Lee. And it's a book about queer, people of color, women. What does that look like? And so I'm really excited to read that. I like books that are not too deep theologically, that are like attainable for normal people. Even though I'm not necessarily a normal person, I've done theological study, but still,
I'm glad we know what makes a normal person or makes someone unnormal, that we've established that.
There's books, but they're really dense, and I find it really hard to read a lot of the really dense stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely fair. No, those are all great. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, I'm part of the Church of the Nazarene. I'm not part of the United Methodist Church, but 2019, the United Methodist Church had a General Assembly conference, actually, I think they call it, where they made this big decision about, continuing to be non-affirming as far as a denomination. And it's like we know like church bureaucracy is like a nightmare and everything moves so slowly. So that has been like a continuing conversation and process about what that's going to look like in the future. And I think there are some more conversations happening around that coming up. And the Methodist, it's the general, I can never remember. It's like a bunch of letters that I can never remember. But there's a book coming out called Methodist Revolutions. That is a collection of essays that's basically like progressive Methodist stuff. So there's stuff about labor, there's stuff about race, there's stuff about ecology, and the authors are from all over the world. It's a very diverse group of contributors, and I got to work on it a little bit with Jorg Rieger is one of the editors, and so I got to work on it a little bit with him and read some of these essays, and it was really refreshing for me, like as I was working on my book of like progressive Wesleyan thought, to be reminded that I'm not alone in that endeavor, that like there are like a lot of ministers and thinkers like and lay people who are actually like committed to like a progressive Wesleyanism. So I'm interested in this book and reading it, seeing it finished, and seeing what conversations that kind of brings up in this like larger conversation about the future of the Methodist Church and by extension the other Wesleyan churches. So that's something that we'll see. It could go a lot of different ways, but I'm very curious.
Groovy, thank you. Yes.
Wow, all of that sounds really cool. I feel like as much as I'm like the PhD student in this Zoom room, like I'm just absolutely not on top of like what books are coming out next or even conferences. Please don't tell my professors that. Yeah, I try to do the minimum work to get by most days. But I guess like these past few years I have been on this like train of reading like a lot of Asian American literature as well as nonfiction, especially like in 2020 as we started talking a lot more about like race and racism and like for different racial groups and how they intersect with one another. So one book that I'm excited to finish is it's called Minor Feelings. And the subtitle is An Asian American Reckoning. I might be butchering that. And it's by Kathy Parkon. And it's like this beautiful nonfiction, semi-autobiographical book that came out in 2020 that addresses a lot of issues that we don't normally think about, especially in the United States, with like, with race, what it means to be Asian or Asian American, and how it fits into like, conversations on white supremacy and class and privilege. So I'm excited to like finish that book and see how I could integrate it into like my work. I'm also, again, not great at like pinpointing specific things to read, but this past semester I made it a goal of mine to like cite Black women or Black authors as like the main theoretical source for each of my course papers. Because I feel like oftentimes when we think of theory, we think of like dead white men or from Europe. But like this semester, just like, no, like I can look at womanist theology or like Black women's thoughts on reproductive health or whatever other issues. So I want to like make it a goal of mine to keep doing that for whatever papers I'll be working on next semester. So.
Great, thank you. That's excellent. I'll cite a non-theological one this time, which actually came out in 2020, but I'm excited to read Redfern, Aboriginal Activism in the 1970s by Johanna Piraputjana. And I'm excited to get into that one, as I continue to wrestle with and learn from, the history of this land. So there's my one. It was 2020, but I didn't get to it last year, except for the introduction. So I'll pour over it. Well, Nicole, Flora, Keegan, thank you so much for joining us. How can people connect with you, connect with your work, or anything you want to plug or shout out at this moment?
It's easiest to find me probably on Twitter. My handle is @Keegs with 3 Z's. And then my website is keeganosinski.com.
Aces.
Yeah, same here. My Twitter handle is @Miss Flora Tang. I sometimes tweet about theology, sometimes just tweet about cats. I do not have a website yet, but I will hopefully get on that in the next 5 years.
I'm not on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, though. You can just search my name and you'll find me probably. I think I'm a bit rainbowy in my profile picture at the moment, but it's a new year, so it's up for a change. So I don't know, but you should be able to find me.
Cool. And does the faith community through that as well, or is that got a separate?
It's a private group, so you have to for safety reasons you've got to reach out. So but there's a jot form you can fill in if you're interested in connecting, and then I'll vet you and let you in. So
Great. Thank you for that. Well, thank you all for this today, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you around the bends.